Daisie's going to tell us about making a GitHub action for kind of an interesting use case, actually. Take it away, Daisy.
Yeah, so this is just like it's a very different change of pace from Rishabh's presentation. Thank you so much, Rishabh. That was great. But what I'm doing here is basically just kind of trying to share like something I figured out that I thought was pretty cool about what I understood about like making GitHub Actions and how actually easy it was to slot into the kind of work that we all do here at CanDIG. So that way, to make it a little bit more obvious, I think, how or why we would do such things for our repositories at CanDIG. So, so let's see, like the main, how do I advance here? Oh, there we go. Okay, so the main thing with what the GitHub action is that it's just a way to, there's two, one thing I found confusing when they were explaining about GitHub Actions is it's actually two different things when they refer to GitHub Actions. There's like the workflow itself, which is triggered by an event. And the workflow is a thing that your repository has in it, like, and it creates the GitHub workspace environment for running other things that are all then called actions. So a workflow is triggered, it creates a hosted container, and then it executes a series of actions in subcontainers. But for some reason, it's listed on GitHub's page as actions, so that's a little confusing. But then the action itself, what they really are talking about are like these little repositories of their own that just execute like a simple scripted process in a hosted container. And so this is like way too much overhead for a simple scripted process most of the time, but it is very convenient because it basically allows you to create this, this contained workspace that they've defined that will do all these different steps of like all these different small actions that in this common workspace, and kind of defines how you would communicate with it. So the reason I was doing this was mostly because I was trying to figure out a way to basically let people check into some of our repositories, Excel spreadsheet data, and then not have to worry about asking them to convert it to CSVs, because it's very hard to look at an Excel spreadsheet in GitHub. Like it doesn't look like it doesn't show you a preview for that. You can't really examine it carefully without downloading it and then opening it in some spreadsheet program of your own. And so that just seems annoying to me. And so really what I thought would be good is just to be able to have an automated thing to intervene and just turn that Excel spreadsheet directly into CSVs and save them in the repo as well. So that, and then every time anybody updated that Excel spreadsheet, the CSVs would also update, and that just seems like it would keep everything consistent, and that would be nice. So there are different approaches that you could take when you're creating an action, but I'm just going to present the opinionated method that I used. The reason it's strongly opinionated is because I thought it went well with what we do with the Docker container setup we use at CanDIG already, and it made a lot of sense that way. So here's some links that you guys can follow later about the instructions that GitHub has about creating actions, and then the action itself that I made. So as I said before, fundamentally an action is an executable self-contained container that does one particular thing. So the container is going to be executed by GitHub in an enclosing container, so that way each actions container can access that enclosing environment's container. So there's like a manifest file that basically defines the ins and outs of the small actions subcontainer and how it will interact with the hosting container. So in this example, we're going to say, like, it's very, very simple. We're going to have a Python script that just performs a conversion on an inputted file. So in this example, like basically we have some convert.py script that just takes an argument for an input file and then converts it to a different kind of file. So what the GitHub action protocol asks you to do is to make sure that you're guaranteeing that you're executing in an environment with all of the same required modules installed and everything, and that you can get all the inputs and outputs in the workspace environment variables. So to make it standard, we just basically write a wrapping shell script for the Python script that we wrote. So it's just entry point.sh, and it's just this is all it is. So then we need to just create a Docker file that basically just spins up a tiny Docker container that does only this, like basically just installs the requirements so that way all our modules are there, and then launches that little wrapper script that we made. It's very, very small. So when GitHub runs it in the workflow context, it will launch like a GitHub workspace with a bunch of environment variables and whatnot defined. But if you're testing this on your local machine, basically it would be very similar to a Docker Compose stack that has this some kind of setup like this, where it just defines the context of exactly where you are, and then an environment variable called GitHub workspace that is also your working directory. So if you were executing this action manually when you're testing, then you could basically just run this action with some, with some test file like test.xls, and then if you run it, it works. So in this local situation now, we know it works. So we're ready to bring it to GitHub Action, like GitHub Actions. It's get to the GitHub environment. So again, all actions is a specifically defined setup to explain to GitHub how you want to run this container and what it needs. So they define this with a little manifest, a YAML, that just defines what the inputs are, what kinds of things those should be, and how to run it. So here, basically, we're just saying that there's an input file, and that's required, and it runs using Docker with the Docker file and has this one input argument. So in order to run the action in a workflow, what you would do then is create a workflow in YAML in some repository that you want to execute actions in, and then you would call, instantiate, you would call that action inside the workflow. So you commit and push the action to its own GitHub repository so it has a place to be. And you create a name release, and then that way any GitHub workflow would just use it by referring to that repo. So owner/action name @release. And so it looks something like this. The GitHub, the workflow YAML is basically just has a job that executes on a particular trigger, like say push to the repository. So this job converts CSVs. Basically, you tell it what kind of platform you would like to run your Docker containers on, and then you say the few sections. First, you can get actions from their GitHub marketplace of other people's actions that have already been done. So, say checking out the actions is an action that's already been defined, which is very convenient for me. Then I run the new action that I created, this XLSX2 CSV, and then it just converts the, the input file, and then commit. And that's another action that I found on the GitHub Actions marketplace. So yeah, each of these steps have access to default environment variables. So yeah, so like when those are already defined in GitHub's documentation for how these actions work. And so basically now, since we defined it on push, anytime anyone pushes to the repository, the workflow will execute. So it will just, when you push something, you'll see that this happens on the actions, little actions tab on GitHub's website. And yeah, it does the thing. And yeah, so you can go look at how it executed and everything, but yeah. And so yeah, like I said, there's a lot of actions that have already been created. You can find them in the GitHub marketplace, which is nice. So like if you can surround your whatever it is that you think is a unique thing to do with other useful bits and pieces around it, and it's very convenient. But yeah, it just seemed to me that GitHub Actions are an interesting way to use, like a very interesting way to use Docker containers, and what seems like a really, really overly elaborate container setup to do something pretty simple, but pretty clever in that it does take out a lot of the inconsistencies in trying to specify just something that you want to happen on any particular trigger. So yeah, it was really easy to set up this GitHub action, and I think that it will be useful for CanDIG in helping us have stronger opinions about what kinds of data we want to have, like what kinds of data formats we want to have stored in our repositories. that it will allow us to have, these database repositories, with more consistent, maybe validators or consistent, formats that will help us not have to consider as many file formats and types when we run, our other downstream processes. And yeah, that's basically about it. Any questions?
Very cool. Thanks, Daisie. I'll take the liberty of asking the first question again. So you mentioned push as a trigger. What other, in your explorations, did you see any other kinds of triggers that you thought would be particularly useful?
I mean, yeah, you could do something that happens on, merging a pull request, or, so like it doesn't happen every single time, but, only when you, want to clean up things on a merge, for example. I can't think of anything.
You can also run them on submitted pull requests.
Mm-hmm. So ways to kind of clean up, like unify whatever formats people are bringing in before they do, before you have to really look at it.
Or run your test suite.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the usual cases for actions are for CI/CD kinds of things, which makes a lot of sense. But I thought, I think it would be, for our case, we really use a lot of other things for CI/CD. We usually use Travis, or, we're trying to work on Jenkins and things like that. I don't know if we had a plan to use a lot of GitHub Actions for CI/CD, but yeah, I think that, we do do a lot of manipulation of data files, and maybe that would be nice to do some automated data munging using something like a GitHub action.
Very cool. What other questions do people have for Daisie? While people are thinking, is there a second use case you've got in mind now, or I know you implemented this a month ago. Are there immediate use cases that have sort of been niggling at the back of your mind since?
There are a couple things that are kind of half shaping themselves in my head, but not really fully. I was thinking that it would be nice to use something like this to validate input files in, like, for formatting and everything, but I haven't really thought it all the way through. I mean, the nice thing was that you could use validators that are defined inside the repository itself as you go, or defined in other repositories that do other parts of it. Instead of having to necessarily, like use basically to, like, inside your own thing, launch an entire, say for example, like Katsu instance, or library in your own thing. You could just grab that one validating file or whatever that you wanted to look at from their repository and a particular version, and then that would be, just a different way of approaching cross repository files.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Do you know? Sorry, not that you necessarily, you probably haven't looked at all 10,519 marketplace, but you know if there's actions to create an issue, because it'd be really fun if some of these validation tasks could flag an issue.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there are. I think that would be one of the primary things that people do with this. I didn't look that carefully at them, but yeah, I think that's definitely one of the main use cases I saw in a glance.
Super cool. What does anyone else have any questions for Daisie?
Go ahead.
I have a question. I don't use GitHub very much, but is there anything related to the Git hooks?
So this is so this is a much I think this is like, so Git hooks are local things that would run on the server that you like it's just, like in Git, I think, that would prevent you, like would like I think if I recall correctly, like Git hooks are something that happens when you do something in Git itself, so it's part of the repository itself. These are basically GitHub is offering to run a bunch of containers for you, like a weird container stack that does really small things, but in a very consistent way. And basically it's basically a software as a service kind of thing that they're offering to their users. So I think
So
that's
this feature is only available within GitHub, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if GitLab, for example, has anything similar. They might. But yeah, this is like this, and like GitHub is, will offer you a certain number of, minutes of GitHub Actions you're allowed to use per month or whatever, unless you pay them more. So it's not, so it's more of a software as a service kind of situation, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
I
Karen,
have
did
one
you-
more question. Yeah.
Oh,
So this seems like, I mean, maybe it seems like an obvious extension to me, but maybe not, but I don't know. So I was thinking about the demo that you did the other day with the sort of manifest and the ingests, and it seems like this would be a nice way to sort of integrate that together and have automated checking of, here's a file that I, as the committer, am asserting is the same format as what I've done previously or others in some sub-project, and being able to determine that right on commit or right on, pull request. Like,
I mean, that is true. This would part of you can obviously see some flavors of the manifest file from this, coloring my ideas of how I did the other manifest for the other thing. But yeah, we could totally run that ETL thing as an action on repositories that we were using to save, like private repositories we were using to save data, and that would be a way to just automatically make, like pre-generated, Katsu, M-code packet data or whatever, Argo data, whatever we decide to use, without having to personally download things and run just run a, Python environment yourself for no really good reason. You could just do it. Just GitHub could just do it for you. That would be nice. Didn't even think of that, but it seems pretty obvious now.
Very cool. All right. And any other questions for Daisie?
I think I'm gonna probably write this blog entry wrapping up a little bit farther than like what I just presented here. Like this is just more of a how-to kind of situation. Like I'm just trying to explain how to do it in the particular case that seemed to me to make the most sense to us at CanDIG. But I think the blog entry would be like, maybe I will think more about whether like how we might run the mappers and manifests through something like GitHub Actions. Since it's just a Docker container thing, it can either happen on our Docker container stack or in a GitHub action, and it would be pretty easy to make something that would translate to both. And that might be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. All right, well, fantastic. Let's thank Daisie. The little clapping emojis aren't quite as good as carrying around with applause in a room, but such is where we are. And thank you very much to Daisie, and thank you very much to Rashad for the work and the work you did, and the presentation. And with that, thanks everyone for attending, and have a great weekend.
Thanks. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you both so much.